Not like just taking it on the chin and going like, no, it's an extra like 2p a kilo. There's no way I'm getting the flavouring.
Just spend the extra 50p.
Yeah.
Enjoy your raspberry flavour.
Have like a chocolate milkshake 3 times a day rather than like off milk. Warm off milk.
If anyone's tried unflavoured whey, it's really, really awful.
Are we recording this?
Yeah. I just started recording a second ago. Just to fill you in, guys, Johnny said the lowest hanging fruit for whey, if you're going to be drinking scoops of it every day, is to just get a flavour.
Well, backdrop to this is we know somebody who decided that the best way to gain weight was to just drink loads of whey, like 4 or 5 shakes a day. I think this is right.
He would have 13 scoops a day and a 15 egg omelette before he went to bed. Bear in mind, this guy is quite big and quite strong, so...
And so, to cut cost, decided to get the unflavoured whey version, which is like self-harming, essentially, as far as drinking protein shakes goes.
I think the hierarchy of bad-tasting powders probably goes unflavoured whey, maybe top 4, top 3. Number 2 would be unflavoured casein, caseinate, not just milk protein, but the kind of old-school one that doesn't really dissolve. It's just kind of like sand at the bottom of your scoop of your shaker.
Yeah, the odd lump that floats to the top that you get in the first mouthful.
My notes used to stink of that because I threw it up all over my maths folder when I was in school. And then number 1 has to be unflavoured Pepto Pro or BCAAs, I think. Do you agree? I
think unflavoured either leucine or BCAAs is awful. If you want to add creatine to that, yeah. So I remember I used to drink BCAAs with some added leucine because for the protein synthesis, obviously, and then added creatine to that. So you'd get the leucine and the BCAA foam that used to sit at the top. I didn't flavour it because I watched all the Animal Pack adverts and stuff and thought I was hardcore. So
and also, artificial sweeteners just ruin fat loss, don't they?
Yeah. Well, you wouldn't want to ruin fat loss. So you'd get the foam from the BCAAs at the top, and then you'd think that was over, and then you'd just get the sand that was the creatine inside of it.
I suppose if you're going to have a bunch of bad-tasting supplements, you might as well mix them all together and have... Did you ever have Super Veg from MyProtein? Which was like garlic and mushroom extract. And if you put that with some psyllium husk, leucine, maybe some fish oil, and then you try and make it more palatable by like filling up the whole shaker so it's like a litre of water rather than just in a shot.
Maybe adding some ice, because that'll make it nice. If you make it like a smoothie, if you pretend it's a smoothie, then it might not taste like hot garlic.
Purple and salty garlic.
It's my V diet story. Do you remember?
I remember. Would you like to? Would you like to recount this?
So, T Nation a while ago. Really, I think they still have it actually on the main site. Something called the Velocity Diet, which was basically 4 shakes a day. And you had to use... I actually got told off on one of their forums because I asked a question about how to do it with my protein supplements and got told that if I did it with my protein supplements, it wouldn't work. But anyway, so I persisted, ignored Chris Shugart and persisted, bought my protein casein because whey wouldn't work, it had to be casein. Bought Super Veg, which tastes like garlic. Super Fruit, which doesn't taste much better. Bought some fiber powder, woke up on day 1, really motivated, slammed this protein shake that, like, I used the hot tap rather than the cold tap by accident, so it tasted like lukewarm garlic with a little aftertaste, hint of chocolate.
I'm dry heaving already just from the memories.
And on this diet, you were allowed 1 solid meal per week. So on my log on T Nation, I think I made it till about midday and then decided to have my solid meal for the week today. So I think that day I ate a solid meal in the evening, and then the following day I decided to bring next week's solid meal forward to the following evening.
Which means no solid meals for the next 15 days. Is that right?
And I think what happened on the weekend of the first week was I just went to McDonald's.
I remember seeing your log on day 3. It was like, okay guys, never mind, I'm going to start again properly next week for the V diet. The one person who actually managed to successfully do it was Mark.
Mark Hayes.
Yeah, but he lost a lot of strength as well. I think he got lean-ish, like sub 15%. Because it is like 1,200 calories a day for a month. So, of course, it's going to work quite dramatically.
I think you get some peanut butter in like the last shake of the day, so I don't know what anybody's complaining about, really.
It's fine. Don't see the problem.
It's just one of those things that if you tried to do it again now, because you know that you don't need to do it. Like, I think at the time I was convinced that it was the best way to lose fat, so I had really psyched myself up that this was the thing to do. But I just couldn't motivate myself to even attempt it again.
Well, because of the special types of protein that you use, many people gain strength and maybe even 5-10 pounds of muscle over the month. But obviously, if you use any other brand, like, you just lose strength and muscle. So,
I mean, ideally, you would transition from the V diet into iBodybuilder with the Anaconda protocol.
Wow!
And then you're looking at gaining 50 to 60 pounds of muscle in
and losing several $1,000 in the process.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. Anyway, as you can probably tell, we both got new microphones, which we're really excited about. Hopefully
really
this
exciting.
is a much more fun listening experience for you. So yeah, welcome to episode 15. We've got a few questions that we that have been posted on the Facebook thread. So going to be discussing bench press arch, plateaus when lifting, body weight management, whether it's good to kind of have diet breaks or bulking breaks, and competition versus off-season eating.
I can't see any of those questions about the bench press arch. I can just see... Is this on Twitter?
This was on Facebook. Maybe someone either deleted that, or is it on the hidden comments?
Could be.
A few more.
Yeah.
Got it?
No, I can't see it. No. Never mind.
I promise someone asked about it.
Yeah, no, I believe you. You just really want to talk about how big your bench press is relative to mine, don't you? What?
That's it, really. I just pretended someone asked that question. By the way, Johnny, remember that time that I bench pressed more?
Speaking of bench press, has that happened? I think there is a competition, isn't there, where you bench press more than me?
In fairness to you, that was because it was quite a bad competition for you, and I think it was quite a good one for me.
Okay.
So what happened was...
I don't think that invalidates your bench press.
Well, what happened was me and Johnny were both at a local competition quite near my house, so I decided between the 83s and the 93s, I'd done my lifts, decided to drive Johnny home for a bit until the 93s came on after the weigh-in. So we chilled for a bit, had a cup of tea. Johnny starts getting a bit tetchy and says, Yusuf, I really think we should start going back now. I'm like, no, it's fine. Eventually he was like, look, I'm getting a bit nervous, can we at least go back so I can warm up? Turned up and it was basically like Jonathan Watson with his opening squat of 230 kilos. So yeah, I think he did the most rapid warm-up I've ever seen of bar 70, 120, 170, 220 each for one rep.
That weight was as well, I think, a regional record. So I was quite nervous. But yeah, I remember you benching more than me on that day. But you have got a very good bench press. Just the way things go. It's all because... So if you want a big bench press, the thing to do is loads of press-ups. Essentially, press-ups and chin-ups.
Not even kidding. There's an article that we've written called How I Added 25 Kilos to My Bench Press, the Armstrong Pull-Up Program. So if there's one thing you're going to take from this podcast, read that article. And if you've, not for the faint of heart, because it is quite an unpleasant program. There's a lot of volume involved, so it's quite time consuming, but certainly helped. And you can add a bit of size doing that as well.
I think the thing to mention about that is that it leaves you feeling really sore all of the time.
From the neck down, basically.
The amount of pulling volume. Like, I think you do chin-ups 5 days in a row, and I think there's quite a bit of failure in there from memory.
Yeah.
3 sets of push-ups, 2 failure each morning. So, like, if you typically do, like, 5-3-1 or 5x5.
3 times a week, push-pull legs.
You're in for a shock. So that is probably why it works, I suppose.
I think so.
That change in volume. So yeah, don't bother arching on your bench press. Just do Armstrong, and
then
things
you
will
lie down flat as a pancake and just bench press 300 kilos.
Feet on the bench, like grip, hands so close they're touching each other. Take it to your neck, back.
Oh. Well,
so bench press arch. Do we bench press arch or do we not? Good idea or bad idea?
So, in context, both me and Johnny train primarily these last 2 years in sort of 12-week cycles, peaking for powerlifting competitions. So the main goal is always going to be to bench press as much as possible with a pause in a competition style. So the goal there is to bench press as much weight as possible rather than necessarily bench pressing to get a stronger chest and triceps. Obviously that will still happen, but this is all within the context of powerlifting competition. So the first question you need to really ask is, do I need a bench press arch because I'm competing, or am I bench pressing just to get generally stronger? If that's the case, then you want a moderate arch, and if you are competing, then you want to develop your arch as much as possible so that you can bench as much as you can while still hitting the competition criteria.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think as well, with arching while competing, like, the goal is ultimately, it's a few things. One is to reduce the bar path. Obviously, the closer you are to the bar before you begin the movement, then theoretically the more weight you can move. And then it also allows you to push your feet back further. And the more arch you have in your upper and mid back, the greater the angle. What am I trying to say here? Your hip is closer to extension when you're lying flat on the bench. So you can get your hip into further extension, which basically allows you to have more leg drive while your feet are still flat on the floor. Again, this is dependent on the federation. But in the IPF, which is where Yusuf and I both compete, you have to have your feet flat on the floor throughout the whole movement. So arching allows you to move your feet back and still obtain some leg drive while keeping your feet flat. That was a terrible explanation. Well, but I think you get the point.
I mean, with leg drive, that is something that just means the ability to... Because the bench press is a lot more of a technical movement than I really gave it credit for in the past. And it's very much dependent on how much tension you can just develop throughout your whole body and transfer that into pressing. So I'm sure you've heard the analogy of you can't fire a cannon from a canoe, suggesting that... Johnny likes that one.
I think you probably could. I bet you could.
You could, but I think you'd capsize in the process.
Yeah, for the record, I'm not advising that you try firing a cannon from a canoe.
Like, you could probably fire it once with mediocre accuracy, but make sure you have your life jacket on. So, yeah,
for goodness sake, put your life jacket on if you're going to fire a cannon from a canoe.
Absolutely necessary. So, yeah, when you're bench pressing, the idea is you want a big upper back and a stable one so that you can pinch your shoulder blades together, flex your upper back, and also by squeezing your glutes and having your feet in a position where you can extend your hips and squeeze your glutes as much as possible, that's going to transfer tension radiating up your lower back, upper back, and being able to just press more overall. So that's the point of the bench press arch. If you're training for general strength, it doesn't mean that you don't need to use an arch at all. You can still use one. The only difference would be the amount that your lumbar spine is arched, is extended with. You still want your upper back to be arched both sagittally and longitudinally. That's not right. I've forgotten the name of the plane, but
you want a bit of an arch in your upper back, and you want to pinch your shoulder blades together.
Yeah. So you want your shoulder blades back together, and also try and get your head, your shoulder blades close to your bum.
What's currently happening is Yusuf and I are both beginning to realise how difficult it is to verbally explain bench press arching.
On a podcast.
We're both looking at each other on Skype, and we both know exactly what we're trying to say, but then trying to put that into words is quite difficult.
We're trying to do all the little sign languages and gestures, which we realise we can't see, so it's not very helpful.
Doing a bench press arch at the minute while having this conversation. No, we're not really.
I think the best thing to do is watch our video training logs, look at the way that we set up for bench press. If you compete, then follow that. If you don't, then maybe tone down the arch slightly, find a position that you're comfortable with and that you can progress and push through your heels without your bum coming off the bench.
Yeah. I think the key thing with if you're bench pressing and not competing is shoulder stability, shoulder safety. And if you are not pinching your shoulder blades together, then you tend to be in a fairly loose and unstable position. Obviously, that's not to say that you are still able to bench press in that position, but long term, as weight increases, you want to be in a position where there's minimal movement in other joints and other areas of your body apart from the bar moving up and down, and it's described in its predefined path. So kind of minimizing other moving parts in a movement, bench press particularly, because if something goes wrong, it can be quite drastic, like bar in your face type drastic. But you want to be stable. You want your setup to be stable, even if you're not competing. And pinching your shoulder blades and having it a moderate arch is a big part of that. It allows you to facilitate force transfer from your legs through your back and onto the bar as well. So
yeah, for safety and for comparability as well. As your bench press gets heavier and you start progressing through your training program, you don't want any stray variables to start happening, or if your setup is such that when the weight gets heavy you have a bad habit of lifting your hips up or your bum comes off the bench, you don't want that to start being the driver of your progress. You want to have everything as consistent as possible so that week on week you know whether you've got stronger or not stronger, rather than changing the movement and just being better at not bench press rather than what actually you were doing.
Yeah, agreed. I think I'm quite rare in this respect, but I think I could probably add 10, 15 kilos just by moving my bum off the bench and like bouncing the bar a little bit off my chest. Whereas if I do a strict competition setup, pause it and keep my bum down, that's the way of keeping it the most comparable. So yeah, consistency with technique as well is important.
Even though it's not as strong, because I guess the extreme case is that you end up doing some kind of contortion where your bum is nowhere near the bench, but you're able to kind of throw it backwards.
Well, from a powerlifting point of view, if you're not sticking to the rules of the federation, then you're not actually doing a bench press. Yep. You're doing some other kind of press. Flail press.
Flail press. Also, final word on bench press arch. It is something that's worth experimenting with. I think when I first was learning to bench press, I kind of stuck at 90 kilos for a while, and then realized that after seeing a few videos of setup and stuff, I increased it to 105 kilos within 3 to 4 weeks. So I think what happened there is that there was some latent strength that was then capitalized on by improving technique and ability to capitalize on that new technique. So I suppose that relates very much to another question we got, which is how to overcome a plateau when you're lifting.
Before we do that, I just want to give some, rather than just watching our bench press and trying to learn from us. We're never I don't think we've ever done a video that is, this is how to bench press. If you go on Super Training on YouTube, Super Training Gym, which is Mark Bell and Jesse Burdick, they have a guy in called Eric Spotto who does a bench press tutorial, and that gives a really comprehensive step-by-step guide of how to set up, and then kind of the finer points of bench pressing. Lane Norton as well has just done a really good bench press tutorial video on bodybuilding.com, and while his bench press is not, well, at least on a kind of IPF world standard, isn't great, I think it's always best to learn from people like that. People like Dave Tate and the bench pressers in the US who compete in different federations and wear bench suits, and who then post videos on T Nation going, this is how to bench press. While that's still valid, it's maybe not 100% applicable to somebody who's just in the gym trying to bench 3 plates. So learning from somebody who, firstly, bench presses raw, secondly, has struggled with bench press and doesn't just have T-Rex arms and can rep 180 without even training, and then also somebody who is competing in a natural federation and is passing drugs tests consistently, assuming you also fit into those categories. You know, if your first name's Jim and last name's Wendler and you want to get a big geared bench press, then that's not the advice you want to follow. But yeah, listen, I'd probably advise the Lane Norton video just mainly for those points, because he's really struggled with it. I think he even had a pec tear and came back from the pec tear and still, I think, came 9th out of 20 with his bench of like 177. So even though it's got
bench press,
it's a really good bench press. Yeah, he's got long limbs, and makes up for it by squatting 300 kilos anyway. So, but yeah, plateaus.
Yeah, so that's it really. Yeah, the first thing, technique. Make sure that there aren't any holes in your technique, because usually that's, I'd say 90% of cases, a plateau will be down to that. I don't think you're probably not at your physiological limit for power production a lot of the time. So unless you've got like a really freaky lift for your body weight, and you're sort of mechanically limited, or it's like a world standard lift, but apart from that, there's going to be technical things that you can mine and improve your lift that way.
Speaking of Dave Tate, he discusses, so this is presuming we're talking about plateaus in a lift, so trying to squat more and reaching a point where you can't squat more than 140 or 180 or whatever. He describes it as a plateau always is a result of technique, or technical, muscular, or psychological. So as Yusuf's saying, technique's huge. If you are squatting or whatever the movement is, we'll run with squat because it's easy to describe. But if you're squatting in an inefficient way, you're going to reach your technical plateau much sooner at a much lower weight than what you're capable of with your given musculature. So worrying about, do I need to add 5 sets of split squats on my lower body day to increase my like QL function and glute size, when you're squatting with a really narrow stance, your knees are tracking forward, your hips are in the wrong line, and the bar path's right over your toes, then that's not the right way to approach that. So technique first. Then once your technique is perfect, and obviously that's this kind of elusive thing that really everybody's chasing, but once your technique is good and solid, then start thinking about, what are my muscular weaknesses? Where is the bar path slowing? And it's kind of the standard. If it slows if you're missing a squat out at the bottom of the hole, if you're missing a squat halfway up, or if you're missing lockout, there's different things you can work on. And then after that, there's also a psychological component of like, well, actually 180 looks really scary. And then if 180 looks scary, then 220 looks even worse, and 260 looks ridiculous, and 300 looks like it shouldn't even be allowed on a bar, and that kind of thing. So, but what squat or any lift plateaus have you overcome, Yusuf?
Well, actually, that's quite a good. I like the way that it's split into psychological, muscular, and technique. I think one thing that I see very commonly with clients and people in general is that they'll get stuck for months or even a year or year plus at, say, 97.5 kilo bench press or 177 squat or something like that. So the psychological thing is a good factor. And the first time Johnny squatted 200, I remember we just put on loads of like 5 kilo plates and stuff. And the bar did look silly, but it didn't look like a big round number, which I think can be more intimidating at times. In terms of plateaus that I've overcome, my squat was always a problem. I used to squat in sort of Converse type shoes, and I was always doing a squat morning, which is also another common problem where the hips rise before the chest, and then you end up kind of just using your lower back to finish the lift. And as you can imagine, once the weight gets beyond a certain level, it becomes impossible to really progress unless you just got a freakish lower back. So I always assumed at the time that it was because I had a weak lower back, and so I would do lots of hyperextensions and stuff like that. And then this was in the infancy when we were pretty silly. We're still not quite silly, but not as much. So I got some weightlifting shoes. It took me about 5 weeks to get used to them, and I think my squat went down in the meantime, mainly because I was so used to doing these kind of good morning squats that because the weightlifting shoes force you to sit directly into your heels with the squat, you can lose it forward more easily if your squat isn't technically very good. So over time, I lowered the bar position, and now that's the lower back isn't a limiting factor with the squat. So it turns out that the limit was not a weak lower back, but just poor technique. So I guess that's one example of fixing the setup and everything to then break through the plateau. So it wasn't a strength issue at the time, but it felt like it was. So often you might think that something is a muscular limit, whereas actually it's a technique one. And it may not be as obvious as the example Johnny gave of like an absolute train wreck of a squat where your knees are coming forward and you're doing a little bum wiggle coming out and you rushing your setup and all that stuff. It could be something quite subtle. So definitely worth filming yourself from different angles and going to technique as your first port of call for plateaus.
So I think probably the take-home point with this is that applying to the bench press arch point and also the sticking point question, that technique is the kind of the most valuable thing you can do, even if you've been lifting for 10 years, is revisit your technique and evaluate how you can make improvements, because that's obviously that's usually the easiest way to make improvement with the least effort. Obviously, you can fix a weak point by hammering away at the muscular weakness, but you're not really going to see any significant changes on the barbell for 6 months or a year. Whereas if it's just a case of changing your stance width or changing the motor pattern of how you initiate the movement, that could sometimes add 5-10 kilos straight away. So again, some more resources on, it's all very well saying go and learn better technique, but how do you do that? Well, firstly, try and get a coach in your area if you can. Somebody who is much stronger than you is always a good way to gauge it. And then somebody who is coaching other lifters or coaching professional athletes is always ideal. If that's not possible, then you either go online coaching, or YouTube videos are always a pretty good way to learn. So again, on the Super Training channel, there's a guy called, I forget his name. I think it's Ed Cohen. He this probably the strongest guy to have ever lived. He does a squat tutorial and a deadlift tutorial, and they're like 30 minutes long each. And then he does a conventional and a sumo deadlift. The Eric Spotto bench press is fantastic. So I'd consider those for technique first. Focus on that initially till you're really comfortable with your technique, and always film yourself. And send those videos off to other people who can kind of look at them objectively and tell you how to improve. From a sticking point of view, there's a great resource that's on T Nation, which was an article written by Christian Thibodeau ages ago. I think it was in like 2006 or something like that, called Sticking Point Therapy. But in that article, he goes through each of the common areas in all of the lifts. So bottom of the deadlift, middle of the deadlift, top of the deadlift, etc. and then discusses what he thinks might be the muscular weak point for each of those failure points, and then ways to address it. And then the psychological aspect of things usually come over time, but what Yusuf discussed of loading the bar differently, getting somebody to load the bar for you, those things can always help.
There's actually a really interesting thing that I've seen with a couple of female clients, and I don't know whether this is, maybe I'm just theorizing too much about it, that because women have been socialized to not be as strong as men, so they kind of apply false limits onto themselves. But or at least sometimes other gym members apply false limits onto them, which you see quite often with we had one client, Sophie, who because she was lifting more than some other members' masculinity could handle, they would come up and just tell her that it's too heavy for her or whatever else, even though there was no technique problems. They just kind of felt intimidated by it. But anyway, sometimes we have seen, so for example, one client, her maximum dumbbell bench press for a set of 12 was 12 kilos. So I handed her the 18 kilo dumbbells and told her it was the 12s, and she knocked out a set of 12 with it. And afterwards she realized that it was much heavier and was quite amazed. So I think a lot of it is to do with what you kind of prepare and what you're expecting when you set up for something. If you think this is going to be heavy, or I'm going to absolutely dominate this weight, and that can certainly have an effect.
I think having an anchored opinion of what you're capable of as well, similar to what you're saying. Like my girlfriend, I recently taught to deadlift, and she kind of had no prior expectation of what a good deadlift would be, or what she'd be capable of, and was kind of doing multiple reps with 100 on like one of her first sessions, which obviously for a girl of her weight, she's around 60 kilos, is a pretty respectable number to move in your first block of training. But a guy who's been training for 5 years comparatively might have from reading all the stuff online or listening to podcasts or whatever it might be, might have a preconceived idea of what he should be at. And then as soon as he starts to get outside of that normal range, it's like, well, this is really heavy for my body weight or my training age, so I'm bound to miss this. Whereas if he'd been training around Klokov, for example, it'd be like, oh, well, this is a warm-up. So mindset's a massive thing in making or missing one rep max attempts, I think.
Yeah, massively. Your immediate environment, the kind of gym you train at. If you train in a very sort of commercial gym, you might not see anyone really deadlifting over 60 or 100 kilos. And I think to let that influence you and think, oh, I'm doing slightly better than them, or have other people as your reference point that don't take training as seriously as you might, then that's going to limit you as well. There's an interesting quote from Bruce Lee. You probably heard it before, but if you always put a limit on everything you do, physical or anything else, it will spread into your work and into your life. There are no limits, there are only plateaus, and you must not stay there, you must go beyond them.
Very nice.
Very nice. So, next question was on body weight management. So, is it worth being in a maintenance for a while, and competition versus off-season eating? I'll just go and check if that's correct, actually. Yep. How should you determine how long to diet for and when? If you've got competition off-season considerations, is there any point being in a maintenance state for a long length of time, or is this wasting time when you could be gaining or leaning out?
Okay. So there's kind of several questions within that question. So if we address how should you determine how long you diet for, so off-season or competition considerations, that obviously depends on the sport that you do. If you're a bodybuilder, you need to be a certain leanness in a certain time for your show in 20 weeks. Then obviously that is your period of time to diet in. The longer the better usually, because you can minimize muscle loss, maximize fat gain while maintaining strength. And then again, a bodybuilder would always seek to maximize the amount of time in an off season. So you typically hear of these guys who are at the top end of the natural pro circuit. It's a little bit different with drugs, but natural pro circuit, they typically take 2 to 3 years out between shows. So the Yorton Cup, for example, is a pretty high level natural show where a lot of the pro bodybuilders go, Alberto Nunez being one of them, for example. And you often hear of top guys taking as much of an off season as they can. So that would be kind of, to answer the question, it would be you diet for as little time as possible when if you're a bodybuilder, for example. And you're kind of using it as a phase to consolidate the progress that you've made while in an off season in which you would seek to gain muscle, but also while maintaining your leanness as much as possible. If you're a powerlifter, then it's more about where your weight is now relative to what weight category you're in or want to be in. Everybody has kind of a comfortable weight category that they would sit at naturally, the one that they could diet into, and then the one that they could bulk up into, obviously. And then some people are right in the middle of a weight category and it would be a stretch to change. Some people naturally sit at the top. So I'll use myself as an example. I naturally sit between 89 and 93 kilos in the 93 kilo weight category. So how do I determine how long I diet for? I diet for as short a period as possible while keeping my weight within the 83 to 93 kilo weight category. So recently, after Worlds, my weight was up to 94 kilos, and I think I've been cutting for 6 weeks, and I'm now down to 200 pounds. So a bit like five pounds of room to play with. And then again, I would seek to just be increasing my calories slowly over time, while again using 93 kilos as kind of a set point and a trigger to start dieting again. So I think really, I don't know what you think about this, Yusuf, but I would look to, assuming performance in bodybuilding can be leanness on stage and a condition on stage, assuming performance is a goal, then really you want to be dieting for a really strict defined purpose, and you want to be minimizing the amount of time you're in a deficit.
Yeah, I think Johnny said it all on competition versus off-season there. It's about gearing everything towards your sport and dieting for the minimum amount of time that you need to, given those constraints. In terms of is it worth being in a maintenance for a while? I think both physically and psychologically it is. For example, so let's take going up a weight category, it's worth taking it in steps. So let's say you can comfortably gain 3 kilograms and maintain your body fat. It's worth hanging out at that new level of body fat and new weight for a few weeks, both to consolidate psychologically, make sure you're sort of getting used to your new weight and maximizing your strength capacity at that weight, and then maybe taking another bump up, or if you've gained too much fat, maybe drop a little bit before continuing. If you're moving down a weight category, same kind of principle applies, in the sense that if you're, or not even going down a weight category, if you're just, say, planning to lose 10 kilos and you're down 5 kilos, you need a psychological break, and that's quite a significant amount of weight loss to have undergone. So there's no harm in taking 2 or 3 weeks off, eating maintenance, and just getting used to that new weight, and also being able to handle that, because there's the higher risk of injury where if you're losing weight, particularly a significant amount, and you're getting under a heavy barbell, that's a higher percentage of your body weight than you're used to. So your structures are maybe not as well supported as they used to be, so it's worth having a few weeks just to sort of get used to that again, then continuing on. And I think by taking little breaks along the way, and maybe even scheduling them in, that helps reduce the chance of binges and loss of motivation, because at least you've got kind of checkpoints to go along with. I'm coming up with a video course over the next few months, which is going to go into this kind of thing in a lot more detail, particularly the psychological side of it. So stay tuned and see more of that.
Yeah, well, I think you've covered it all there. But one thing I would add is that while I kind of know what the question is getting at, I don't think it's actually possible to be in a maintenance phase. I know maybe your average body weight would maintain week on week, fluctuate within a certain percentage, but in reality, are you going to be going to the gym week on week and lifting the same weights for the same reps for the same sets each week? You're probably going to be either progressing in terms of fat loss or progressing in terms of strength and then ultimately size, just very, very slowly. So I think really, in my opinion, the best way to structure anything, even if you're a general member of the population just looking to look better, is to start off lean enough, or lean enough that you're either competitive in your weight category, competitive for your sport, or happy with the way you look, and then spend as much time as you possibly can with calories high enough so that you can get stronger in the gym. And if you're getting stronger in the gym, then over time, years, decades, you'll add the size that comes with moving those heavier weights.
I think that's a key component as well. I maybe gave the wrong impression there when I was saying if you were to gain 3 kilos. I don't mean that you can just gain 3 kilos in a couple of weeks and that you'll be fine. There is a very low limit to how much muscle you can gain on a monthly basis. Lyle McDonald and Alan Aragon have it in the hundreds of grams per month. For someone who's been training a long time, it would be 100 to 300 grams maybe, and that's at the high end. So to force feed yourself with more calories than you need isn't going to accelerate things any further. So to avoid the chance of spinning your wheels, the best thing is just as Johnny said, have your calories high enough to support your training, but no higher than that. And Johnny's got an article called "How to Stay Lean While Gaining Muscle." Is that right?
How to gain muscle while staying lean.
There we go.
Same thing.
So that's a fantastic article, very comprehensive. Goes over the with some photos and progress shots of how Johnny transitioned from the end of a diet into a kind of off-season eating pattern, gaining some weight while keeping his body fat pretty low, and what that did is save him time in the long run by not having to sort of spend some time cutting down at the end of that period. So I think that is all the questions that we have. So thanks for listening, and speak to you guys soon.